Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 283 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book is called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. So go and pick up that book today on Amazon. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there's nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, being organized as a business owner is so important to running a profitable business. While yes, I was an accounting major in college, today's tools enable just about anybody the ability to stay organized with their revenue, expenses, balance sheet, income statement, and even do your own taxes. For the business, I use Quickbooks. It's the perfect small business solution to tracking profitability and keeping your payables and receivables in order. When it comes to taxes, I use TurboTax. It automatically updates all the tax codes annually and can guide someone with little or no experience through both your personal and your business taxes. Now, there are plenty of accountants that are willing to take your money, I promise you. But look into these two options if you have a simple business without complicated transactions. It's going to save you a lot of money, and it's going to give you the real-time data that you need as a business owner to make better business decisions. Our next guest is Dana Miranda. Dana is a certified educator in personal finance. She is an expert in a broad range of personal finance topics, as well as entrepreneurship and productivity. She founded something called Healthy Rich. It's a platform for inclusive, budget-free financial education, and she's passionate about supporting freelancers, entrepreneurs, and other folks who are exploring self-employment, especially those who face barriers in traditional employment. Dana grew up in a working-class family in a small town in Wisconsin, and when she joined the ranks of personal finance media in 2015, she found the niche led mostly by advice and admonitions from middle-class white men, ignoring the broad diversity of our relationships with work and with money. After leaving a leadership position with a popular personal finance company and spending 2 years as a freelance writer, she expanded Dana Media to bring more voices into personal finance media through freelancing and the company's flagship site, Healthy Rich. Dana has shared her financial expertise as a contributor with Forbes, the New York Times, CNBC, the Motley Fool, NextAdvisor, the Penny Hoarder, and a column for Inc. magazine. Welcome to the show, Dana.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Anytime you want to be talking about personal finances, you got a spot on the show at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because, listen, our college students who are listeners, they are so keyed in to their careers, but also personal finance as well. I mean, they want to make sure that they're going to be able to afford everything that they want to do when they graduate from college. They don't want to go back living in the basement of their parents' house, just to make ends meet. And the cost of debt when we're talking about colleges and things like that. I mean, I'm shopping right now with my kids to figure out which college they're going to go to. And the debt that we are saddling our kids with is just over the top. It's just completely over the top. And so we need to be talking about personal finance all the time. So I
Absolutely.
appreciate what you do. I really, really do. Now,
Thank
you
you.
decided on the University of Wisconsin in Madison for your undergraduate experience. Now, it is a beautiful campus. I've spoken there many times. The water, I mean, it's stunning. But how did you choose the University of Wisconsin?
I kind of fell into it because I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in rural central Wisconsin in a working class town. And my sisters and I were first generation college students. So there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about our options for college. It was kind of an assumption that we would go to an in-state school and a public school. So the University of Wisconsin system is really good, at least was at the time. Our government has started to gut education a little bit, which I hope will change, but is a very great university system. And so there wasn't really a question about going to some public school. And so pretty much everybody that I went to school with was to high school with was in that same position. They were going to go to some UW school, and UW-Madison is the flagship school in the state, and it's the best one. And Madison is also the most liberal and progressive city in the state as well. So if you grow up in a small town and you want to and you're a liberal progressive thinker, that's kind of where a lot of people end up being. So I wanted to be in the city. And so UW-Madison was the best choice within the UW system to be in that city. And I also did well in high school. And so that flagship school within this state is just kind of like your best option from sort of where I was coming from. But you're right, it's a beautiful campus. I didn't do like the campus visit or anything like that. I knew the city, but I hadn't thought that much about campus life before I came. I mostly was thinking about being in the city. And but I really like the most that I got out of my experience was being involved in the student orgs and just like spending time on campus. And the classes were fine, of course, but yeah, it's a really great place to get an education and kind of a launching point for life. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, I was blown away when I got to campus. I'll be honest with you. For somebody who grew up in the Northeast, you're thinking about Wisconsin and you're like, oh boy, like what am I getting myself into? You're thinking of like a small town. And then I got there and I'm like, Madison is stunningly beautiful. I'm like,
It is.
I'm telling you, it is a beautiful place to live. The wintertime can be, a little rough, but it did enable me to go see Green Bay and get a tour of the
Mm-hmm.
stadium. So that was kind of cool. But it is beautiful. It is just stunningly beautiful.
Yeah,
Especially, it depends on the time of year. But if you go in the summer, springtime, it's really wonderful. So
absolutely. And I didn't know sort of how respected, like I said, it's the best state public school in the state,
yeah.
but I didn't know how well respected it was outside of the state
Oh
until
yeah.
I really moved here. I'm still in the city now, or back in the city, until I moved here and went to school and realized how many people choose this as their school. For me, it was just like I was fortunate enough to grow up in this state and have it be my in-state school. So I was really lucky that way.
Yeah, it's got a great reputation around the country. I think, all the graduates that come from there, you're like, oh, okay. And I have a lot to talk to them about. So it's really cool. But all right, so you
Yeah.
obviously made a very good decision there. Now, you were a starving freelance writer and a creative for about 5 years before you started working full time at the Penny Hoarder in 2015. And from that point on, it just seems like personal finance became your passion. I mean, that was like everything you were talking about from that point forward. So why was it personal finance that you suddenly just came to grips with, like, this is my mission?
It that was kind of accidental. I worked as a freelance writer because I was interested in writing
Mhm.
from a creative standpoint. I was trying to figure out how to like be a writer professionally. And I kind of through networking in the space, I connected with someone who was doing content for the Penny Hoarder on a contract basis. And then her company got acqui-hired by the Penny Hoarder. And so they were bringing in-house staff in. So I applied for a job and mostly just wanted to work with that group of people. I hadn't thought about personal finance at all. I was in the position that a lot of people are in when they leave school, where had really low paying job. I was not making good money as a freelancer. I had a ton of student loans that I was just ignoring, some old credit card debt that I also had just started to ignore after cutting out my credit card. And so I just wasn't thinking about personal finance. I just thought like I'm a broke person and that's my fate. That's the life I'm going to live because I want to be a creative. And I finally got this full-time job. And one, I started making a steady income, which was fantastic. But two, it's a personal finance media startup at the time. And so I was learning about personal finance in the meantime. So I learned about my own personal finances. And then with the steady income that I had, I was able to get a lot of those things that I had just kind of buried my head in the sand about in order. And so it became less kind of intimidating and boring for me in what I thought, the way that I thought it would be. And it was more like, oh, this is really interesting to learn about like how all these systems work, what actually goes into your credit score, what it means to pay off debt, what your credit report looks like, what is actually going on with student loans, which is like there's a lot of options that you have that a lot of people don't know about for repayment and deferment and all these things that can kind of help you out and get you through month to month. And so it was really interesting to me to learn all these things that no one around me had ever talked about. And I also then concurrently, as I was working in the personal finance industry, through 4 years working the full-time job and then 2 years freelancing, like you mentioned, I started to see that there was really just one perspective kind of being talked about in the space, for a very as a dominant perspective in the space. It was very middle class, white. Most sites are run by men, even if I'm a female freelance writer, a lot of writers, but a lot of them are owned by white men with middle class backgrounds. And so a lot of the conversations that I would have with people, like even with the privileges that I have had growing up as a white woman, cis woman in the Midwest, and they were not understanding like the experience of a working class person, or the experience that I had had when I was a starving freelance writer, like making $12,000 a year, that trying to make ends meet. A lot of the people writing about personal finance and offering advice about like the so-called right way to do things with your money didn't understand the experiences of people who were actually having a lot of struggles with money. And so that brought me to Healthy Rich. So everything I was learning, I just found it so interesting. And then I found this kind of passion and push to expand what was going on in the space and to start seeing, giving more of a platform to those other perspectives and hearing more of those voices, and starting to kind of investigate some of this traditional advice that I was seeing and often giving without knowing it.
Yeah, I love this natural, organic progression that you've been on. It's just so interesting to me. And then obviously you found a niche, you found an area that really wasn't being served. And I love that. I mean, as an entrepreneur, that's exactly what I do. I go out there and I look for populations that aren't being served properly. And I just set up shop and say, you know what, I can help you. I've done it over and over and over again in my career. And I think that there's an important lesson in there, which is, we may or may not have a really good direction when we go to college and when we get that degree, but just be open to what the universe is trying to tell you, because
Yes.
you never really know like where you're going to end up or how life is going to unfold. But good for you for recognizing all those signs and saying, you know what? There's a lot of people here that aren't really being served, and I only hear one voice in personal finance, and there's a lot of voices there. So let's, project some of those other unheard voices instead. So that's really, really cool. And so now,
Mhm.
you talk about something that you call budget culture, which is this damaging set of beliefs around money that rewards restriction, deprivation, and promotes really an unhealthy and fantastical idea of financial wellness. Do you think that this culture is damaging because it doesn't really consider your happiness, your health, or your well-being?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's that kind of single perspective and one right way to do money
Mhm.
is what I'm talking about when I talk about budget culture. It's saying everybody who just says like, you should do this. Here's what your budget should look like. Here's how and when you should be paying off debt. Here's how much you should be saving and exactly how to do it. That's all budget culture. It's just finding this set of rules to respond to these real everyday struggles with money that we have. And it one big piece of it is that it doesn't consider the nuances of our relationships with money. So that diversity that I was talking about, which
Mhm.
is whether you're talking about gender, racial diversity, or income diversity or anything like that, even just like on an individual level, each of our individual everyday experiences with money are different. And so no set of rules, like no specific budget or set of rules, can res- respond and get us to our individual financial goals. And so we start to feel like we're failing because we're trying to follow these steps that we're given and not living the life that we want to live and not having the finances that we want to have. And so it's really easy to just feel like you're a failure because you can't do it right. And the other side of budget culture, this set of rules, is that it completely ignores your general wellness. It sort of silos money into this specific thing that's just about like money, numbers and economics. And if you can just get the numbers right, then everything will be fine. But it ignores the fact that money is just one piece of our lives that's interwoven with everything else that exists. So it affects your decision on where you go to school. It affects where you work. It affects the kind of food you eat, the kind of housing you live in, the recreation, the friends that you have, the clothing that you wear. It affects everything you do every day. And so you can't just make a siloed financial decision based on a set of numbers that you're given, based on a certain, percentage of where your money should go in your budget or something like that. So it becomes kind of irrelevant. Like if you take just a set of rules, it's really hard to apply to a real life, because people aren't just a collection of numbers in a bank account. You have this full life that you need to address, and money is just one piece of that.
Wow, love that perspective. Let's talk about Healthy Rich, because there you publish, you produce, and you host projects from all of these different budding creators whose voices generally we just don't hear enough in personal finance media. So, people, will talk about BIPOC, we'll talk about women, LGBTQ plus, people with disabilities. There you help people find joy in what you call eating avocado toast and find purpose in understanding these systemic forces that you think that really just keep people broke. So what are some of these systemic forces that you're talking about that keep people broke?
So there's a lot, but I can touch on a few, mostly it's certainly not exhaustive, but we need to talk about these and kind of just like give voice to some of these things to get people understanding and looking for those ways that like the system is just not set up for the majority of us. Really, it's really just set up for a few people who have money and power to help them keep it. But it's particularly egregious for a lot of groups of people. So we talk a lot about pay gaps. So there's racism and gender discrimination that perpetuates those pay gaps based on gender, race, sexual orientation, gender identity and presentation, ability and disability in the workplace. There's a lot of things that are very insidious in the workplace that perpetuate, and in our culture, that keep, again, a very small group of people earning more money more easily and getting higher paying jobs more easily than a lot of us. Systemic racism also is behind historical policies that a lot of people might have also heard about, like redlining, that keeps families from building generational wealth, and also from just like being in safety and those other things that I talked about that kind of are interwoven with your financial life. There's also, I don't have the numbers, but in a lot of states, like about half the states in this country, I think, legal credit and lending discrimination against LGBT people. So there are not explicit credit protections in making credit and lending decisions for trans people and queer people in a lot of states in this country. And then historically, it was women couldn't get credit cards without like their husband's permission until the mid 1900s, mid 20th century. There continues to be credit and lending discrimination against people of color. It's, was very explicit and legal for a really long time. So all of those things are currently hurting people in the system and have historically made it difficult for people to build wealth and see themselves living, these lives of financial freedom that a lot of other people seem to have access to. And then we also just have tax policies that advantage specific types of lifestyles. So you get tax breaks as a married person, for having children, for home ownership, for full-time employment. As a self-employed business owner, you might know how difficult that can be to navigate when it comes to taxes. It's much easier if you just get a W-2 and file that, and your taxes are all taken care of. Saving in retirement accounts in a very specific way, investing in the stock market, those are all tax advantaged. And a lot of financial planners rightly advise people to take advantage of those tax breaks. But you have to also think of the flip side, that means that if you choose any different path, that you are going to have a harder time. You're missing out on a lot of those things. So those are just a few things, a way that we kind of bake into the system, things that make it harder for some people to build wealth, to have the kind of job they want, to have the kind of financial lifestyle that they want.
I'm glad you bring up all those points because now I really understand a little bit better why Healthy Rich and having that platform is so important because of all of these systemic forces that are at play. What have you learned about building a big audience at Healthy Rich?
The biggest thing that I've learned, and it's been about a year now where we've just been publishing content, connecting with the audience, and building a community around the brand.
Mhm.
And the biggest thing that surprised me is the audience's willingness to like rally around each other, which has been really fantastic. I don't think that I'm a natural kind of community builder, so I don't try to do that a whole lot in my work. I'm really focused. I'm come from media, and so I'm really focused on the content publishing side of things.
Mhm.
And so my role has just been to find these writers to share their stories on the platform. And I've seen in promoting it, and we also bring our contributors together in a community to support each other after they've been published, so they can support each other as they're growing in their careers as writers or whatever they're doing. And I've seen them really like lift each other up, make connections on social media because they were both contributors to the site. They respond, they continue after someone has been published on the site to like respond and share the content that we're publishing from other people, to respond to their stories, to share like how they're being, what they're learning, how they're being affected by other people's stories. So it's been really great for me to just kind of sit back and watch the writers do that kind of naturally, in this way that I think when you share your personal story, the more kind of real you are and the more specific you are about your personal experience, even though that is your own individual experience and no one else's is exactly the same, we tend to be able to find pieces of ourselves in that and to connect with strangers really quickly through that. So it's been really great for me, in not having that huge strength of like community building or kind of self-promotion, to be able to just focus on the content and the stories and just sort of let those naturally, organically kind of connect the people in the community.
It's so interesting because, the same is really true for really good speakers. You have to be authentic and you have to be vulnerable. And if you do those two
Yes.
things, then you can do anything. I mean, like people will find ways to connect with your story. And everybody in the audience will have those hooks when they're like, oh, yeah, like I know what he or she is talking about right there. Like I felt the same thing. But authenticity and vulnerability is really the key for people to connect with you. And that's what makes a really good speaker. Um, so,
Absolutely.
so yeah, so
Because even if they don't, even if there's nothing about your story that is reflected in their story, just showing that authenticity and vulnerability shows your humanness, and we
yeah,
can all connect through that. So I think that's really it. It really is that simple,
it is.
even though it feels hard to like be vulnerable.
Right.
It's really powerful.
It really is so powerful. I mean, it's that every single time. And that's what I talk about with all of our speakers. We're actually bringing them in this weekend to Nashville to train. I mean, it's all about that. If you can do that, you're going to be super successful. But anyway, so all right.
Mhm.
So why do you recommend that people should be keeping a diary temporarily, just to track their expenses in a valuable way?
I I emphasize temporarily there because I think a lot of budgeting advice is about just perpetually tracking your spending.
Hmm.
And I parallel budget culture to diet culture a lot, and if you put that in terms of just like tracking every calorie you eat every day in perpetuity, it's really cumbersome, and it can be really damaging for a lot of people too. It's not a very healthy relationship with food. So translate that to money. I think it's really the same way, that in perpetuity, I don't think you need to watch where every single dollar is going every day. But for a lot of people, if you like, we're in a situation like I was, where you're burying your head in your sand about your money, and you're just getting by, and you're not thinking about where your money is going, how you're spending it, what kind of life you want to build with your money, and where you really want that money to be going, to support your values and your goals, then keeping a spending diary for like a few days, a week maybe, can just help you start to be just like keeping, a journal at all about your feelings or just kind of what you did in your day. It can help you be more mindful about what you're doing with your money. So it's not about holding yourself accountable, which I think a lot of kind of spending tracking does, where it's not about looking at it and saying, I need to be making changes here, here, and here because I'm overspending and it's not in line with my budget or with whatever someone said I should be doing. But it's just about the act of writing it down helps you create some mindfulness and to start to see, like, I spent money. How did that feel? I definitely recommend doing much more sort of self-reflection than just sort of tallying and calculations. It's more about understanding your experience with money and getting a clear understanding of your relationship with money.
Makes a lot of sense. The college students who are listening right now are thinking about getting some more income. I will tell you that they're looking at
I
side
bet.
hustles. I mean, they're trying to figure this out on the fly. Do you have any creative ways that our listeners can get some more income?
There's a lot out there. And that is something that I also learned when I got into the personal finance space is as I had spent so many years struggling as a freelance writer and not realizing that there are so many ways to do things that I was interested in and make a little bit of money on the side. I'm a huge proponent of self-employment and freelancing in general, because whether you do it as a side gig on the side of going to school or working another job or anything that you're doing, or you want to build a career as a freelancer or build your own business,
Mhm.
I think it adds some autonomy and creativity immediately to any work that you're doing. So you have some freedom and autonomy in how you earn money. You can turn pretty much any interest that you have into some sort of freelancing, like freelance writing, or design, or web development or video editing, any interest that you have, you can turn into like a service for someone else. You can use your interest to create something to sell. Like if you're crafty, make something to sell on Etsy. You can make designs, or if you're just witty, you can do slogans that you can put on t-shirts, all of that. There's a lot of really easy ways to get it like an online business going kind of quickly. The technical aspects shouldn't scare people off or hold people back. I think all of that, like, just if you want to do it, Google it, and there's probably an easy way to do it. You can also just offer like handyman services in your neighborhood. Like, think back to how teenagers made money in, probably in the 80s and 90s,
Mhm.
going back a little further, mowing lawns or fixing things. There's also peer-to-peer apps that can help you connect with people to do that if you're not in, like, the idyllic like 1950s neighborhood anymore. You can get on something like Instacart or TaskRabbit if that's in your area, and offer those kinds of services to people. So it's a simple way to make a little bit of money, and kind of add a little bit of that autonomy to your income.
Yeah.
And then I also wouldn't discount any kind of government assistance. Look for what you qualify for when it comes to tax credits, SNAP benefits. Student loan refunds aren't income, they're debt that you're taking on, but it can be a really important source of money for a lot of people. It was for me while I was in school, because it helped me to pay my rent and focus on going to school and only have to work part-time in the meantime. So look for ways that you can get additional money without more work too. If you don't have the space in your life to add work, don't discount those.
All great suggestions, and you're absolutely right. I mean, when I was a teenager, I had a lawn mowing business, and luckily, I lived in a neighborhood where literally, I mean, it was like that '50s neighborhood where everybody was right next
Yeah.
to each other and everybody talks to each other. So it was real easy for me to go from lawn to lawn to lawn to lawn, bang it all out and, on Saturday and Sunday and really make a very good living as a teenager. I will tell you that. But now with all of these apps that are out there, it really does make things a little bit easier. We certainly didn't have apps back then, I promise you. And so this makes it a little bit easier. And I like the fact that just owning your own business. I mean, that can be something that you can do while you're in college, like a t-shirt
Mhm.
design business, like you suggested.
Right.
And then, if it hits it big, I mean, that could be something you do after college or something you sell to somebody else to run. So I like the
Hmm.
fact that you're owning and you're building kind of your own destiny, if you will. Something
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
you could sell off or you could spin off or you can, be acquired by some other larger business. I like all of those things. I think those are all really
Hmm.
cool things, investing in yourself, basically.
Yes.
Earlier, I talked a little bit about businesses and some of the tools that I use, like QuickBooks and TurboTax, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Hmm.
What are some good money management apps that you would recommend to our listeners, maybe just for personal finance?
There's a ton. That's a big thing that I also saw exploding when I got into personal finance media was the explosion of financial technology apps. A lot of budgeting apps, banking apps, online banks are really having a moment. And I really enjoy watching how people come up with tech solutions to various problems. So I really enjoy exploring a lot of these fintech apps. But I would caution that a lot of them also like are very tied up in budget culture. And so there are a lot of things that are really focused on like setting limits for where you spend your money, tracking your money, kind of giving you these like reports that aren't really that valuable, I think, in a lot of people's lives. But they can give you the kind of information that I found really valuable early on, which is just that understanding of like what is going on with my money, what even is any of this.
Mhm.
Um, the biggest thing, like the biggest start for me was any app that breaks down your credit report. So I used Credit Sesame for a while. I use Credit Karma now. I recommend both of those. I'm not sponsored by any apps, so these are all just personal recommendations.
Yeah.
You can get your credit report for free from the government. You're entitled to that every 12 months from each of the three credit bureaus. But these apps they show you your credit score or one of your credit scores, and they make it a lot easier to understand what's going into your credit score. So that seeing the breakdown in an app was the first time that I understood like what all the debts that were on my record and how they were affecting my credit score. So they show you kind of how things are weighted and the percentage of if you're trying to improve your credit score, what you can focus on first. The other caution that I would give with these is that most personal finance apps, and especially these that show you your credit score, make their money from recommending financial products. So a lot of what they're going to do is recommend that you take out loans and credit cards to help improve your credit score. Those things can do that, but they're going to be a lot more enthusiastic about recommending them than is probably actually going to be helpful for you. So take the information from them and try to overlook some of those recommendations, get a second opinion, do your research before like taking out any of those recommended loans. But the information, just seeing it broken down is really valuable to kind of get you started. There's also an app for bill pay reminders called Prism. I haven't used that personally. I've just kind of explored it a little bit, but anything like that can help you either automate your bill pay or just set reminders and track your bills can just take money off of your mind, which I think is helpful. It can also help you avoid late fees and set up auto pay and those kinds of things that can help get you discounts on your bills, which is nice. But for me, I think the biggest thing that any app can do is just help you not think about your money day to day. Like that's my biggest goal, is to just like have it be an organic piece of your life that supports your life, but not something that you constantly have to manage. And then in the same way, online banks can help you manage your money and take that kind of out of the equation. Digit is one that I really like. They started as a savings app, an automated savings app, which is a feature that they still have and is really useful, but they're rolling out an online bank now that helps you manage your money in a way that I think is really intuitive and take care of all of your goals and commitments that you've made with your finances, and just very easily see how much money you have to spend at any given time, which is kind of what we want to know when we're looking at, a budget. So that app, I think, is really helpful for that. And then also there's a lot of online banks, online banking apps that support various values and various marginalized groups. So kind of, you can kind of find anything, any value or interest that you have, you can probably find an online kind of affinity bank that supports that. But a couple of options that I really love are Aspiration, which has been around for several years, and it is focused on eco-friendly banking. So they like plant trees and help you invest in sustainable funds. And then the Daylight app is a lot newer. It's a banking app for the LGBTQ community and allies. So anybody can open an account, but it supports LGBTQ financial education and helps people with specific financial circumstances that are specific to the LGBTQ community. So you can support that just by banking through the app.
Wow, you are a wealth of information. I think that is a very complete answer, and some great resources for our listeners to go and check out now. So that is really, really cool.
I adopted a little bit of an obsession with online banks.
I can see that, and
apps,
it shows, but I like it because it gives our listeners a lot of options to go and research. So I really like that a lot. I have one more question for you. Women are more likely to have a bachelor's degree than men. But still, women are earning just 81% of the salary that their male peers can expect to earn after graduating at the same level, and hold nearly 2/3 of the student loan debt in our country. This is all, of course, according to the American Association of University Women. How do we close this gap in this country?
Just a small question. No big
Small
deal,
question.
no pressure.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, there's so much that needs to change. A lot of the systemic stuff we were talking about earlier. I think the simplest thing is for people to hire women and pay them more. That's a very basic step. Do it intentionally. Like, look for women, look for ways that you can connect with women, make sure you get your job listings in front of women, and also look for ways that you can support career development for women. A lot of the reasons that people say that they don't hire or promote women is that they just can't find qualified women, which is absurd. They're out there. But also, if that is something that you value, support leadership development in women from an early age. Hire women and support them within your company. And pay them more intentionally. Pay transparency is really important too. Don't set policies if you're in charge of that in your workplace, or if you have any influence over it. Don't set policies that punish employees for sharing their pay. I would encourage, if you really want to be radical about it, for companies to be transparent about pay for various positions, because that we know that a lot of pay discrimination hides behind that secrecy of people feeling like they can't share their pay. As soon as people start talking about it, you start to see where those discrepancies are, and then you can actually address them. A lot of people don't realize that they're not being paid what their male counterparts are being paid for doing the same job. Yeah. And then we also need to add workplace policies that support care work, because we know that working women tend to take on a lot more of the caretaking load for children and family members and parents. So we should have mandated paid parental leave. So I would recommend, if you have any influence over that in your company, to have institute a paid parental leave policy in your company. But we can all just support politicians and policies in our communities, states, and the country that would mandate paid parental leave, so that everyone has equal access to it. And then also support flexible workplace policies, like remote work. We have seen has been a huge impact for working families since the pandemic, since a lot of more people have had access to it. As long as kids are in school and parents don't have to try to parent and work simultaneously. But in normal times, flexible workplace policies that allow for flexible working hours, remote work, flexible working locations, a lot of paid time off and sick leave, allow for caretaking and domestic work so that that burden doesn't fall on, again, women who will work a full-time job and then come home and do a second full-time job. Also, if you are not a woman and you're in a relationship with a woman, take on some of the domestic work and caretaking work. Make sure that you're having conversations about how to split those duties equally to make sure that you both have equal access to the career goals that you want to achieve.
Makes a ton of sense. Very nice. All right. So, we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. And I do get to Madison, Wisconsin. They do invite me to come and speak from time to time. So when you go out for a meal, what's your favorite restaurant so I can go and check it out?
Yeah. So if you come to Wisconsin, I say that you have to eat bar food, like burgers and fries, old fashions and tap beer is what you should be looking for. There are a ton of options in Madison. So kind of any bar you walk into that has food, it's probably going to be good, even if it doesn't look like a fancy restaurant. I actually really regularly still go out to eat at a place that I enjoyed when I was a college student here, called The Vintage. So if anyone is a college student here or you've been in town, there's one on campus. I have graduated to an East Town location where I can kind of be an adult and I go and eat, at like 5 p.m. So, but the food is fantastic there. And they do have great drink specials if you like old fashions or other kind of mixed drinks. It's a great atmosphere and really kind of basic but well done bar food.
I love it. That sounds like the perfect recommendation for Madison, Wisconsin.
Yes.
That's about as authentic as you're going to get. So I love it. That's a great recommendation. So if our listeners, if they want to connect with you, if they have more questions about personal finance, maybe they want to bring you in to speak on their campus about financial literacy, where should they go to connect with you?
Yeah, I'd love to do all that. So please reach out. The best place to find me and learn more about Healthy Rich is at our website, healthyrich.co. That is kind of the hub for the platform. So there you can find our blog and our podcast, Make Money Better, where we talk with leaders in the personal finance industry and in workplace culture and beyond about how we can make money better for everyone. And you can also find information about our personal finance classes, which we'll be launching this fall. So that's the best place to go. You can also find Healthy Rich and me on your favorite social media network. But I would, my favorite way to talk to people is through email. So send me an email, subscribe to our email list on the website. That's going to be the best way to follow our work.
I love it. Healthyrich.co. Go and check it out. Sign up for the newsletters, and you can certainly connect with Dana there. What can I say? Dana Miranda, you are one of a kind. I really appreciate everything that you do. I love this niche that you've carved out. I think it's fantastic. I think it really does bring a lot of other voices to the room that traditionally we heard nothing from. And so the fact that you're putting a spotlight on it is just fantastic to me.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations on all the success. And thank you for what you do. It's really important what you do. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for letting me talk about it.
You got it. Anytime, Dana. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed Dana's talk. If you did, please like it. Please share it with other college students on social media, because I'm sure there's a lot of other college students that are thinking about personal finance right now, and they can really use some of the tips that Dana suggested here in this interview. So please share it. That is super important. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we are going to see you next time.